Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Nazir. We are up to Perek Gimel Mishnah Vav. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'ilui Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Ranbai V'Eliyahu ben Burchai Israel Chana bad Miriam and Sason ben Raya Menuchatam began Eden Amen and Avdei ben Chaim lechaim v'derefua shelemav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa Betor Shah Chulei Israel. The rabbis decreed that all lands outside of Eretz Israel are considered tameh, and a person who is standing on such lands or touches soil from them becomes tameh as if he touched a corpse. This is known as the tumah of the lands of the nations. Now the rabbis decreed this because of the practice of the non-Jewish nations to bury their dead in unmarked graves anywhere, not just in cemeteries. Therefore, any land outside of Eretz Israel might have corpses or parts of corpses buried in it. Now this tumah is rabbinic. Under biblical law, we do not suspect that any area contains a corpse unless we know that a corpse was buried there. Accordingly, if a person who is outside Eretz Israel accepted upon himself a term of Nazirut, he cannot fulfill his Nazirut obligation there. Rather, he is obligated to travel to Eretz Israel immediately, purify himself from his Tumah, and observe his term of Nazirut in Eretz Israel. The Mishnah teaches the law for someone who observed his entire term of Nazirut outside Eretz Israel and only then came to Eretz Israel. Mishna Nazirut Arbev, someone who accepted upon himself a long term of Nazirut, meaning more than the standard 30 days, while he was outside Eretz Israel, and he completed his term of Nazirut there, and only afterward came to Eretz Israel, how many days must he observe again? Instead of fulfilling the rabbinic requirement to go to Eretz Israel and observe his term of Nazirut there, he observed the entire term outside of Eretz Israel. The rabbis therefore penalized him and required him to observe his Nazirut again in Eretz Israel after his purification. Bet Shammai say Nazir 30 Yom. He must be a Nazir for 30 days. Since the Tumah of the land of nations is only a rabbinic Tumah, he has fulfilled his biblical obligation when he observed his term of Nazirut outside Eretz Israel. According to Bet Shammai, therefore, we treat him leniently and require that he repeat his Nazirut for only a standard 30-day term, even though his original vow was for longer. Now, the Tumah of the land of nations is one of the types of Tumah that do not cause a Nazir to forfeit all his previous days. Therefore, the days he observed outside Eretz Israel count toward his term, and he must observe only 30 days more as a penalty. Bet Hillel say Nazir batchila, he must be a Nazir as at the beginning of his term, meaning he must observe a term of Nazirut in Eretz Israel for the length of time he originally vowed to observe. According to Bet Hillel, we penalize this Nazir by treating him as if he did not observe his Nazirut at all, since he observed it outside Eretz Israel. And the Mishnah cites a related incident. Maaseh beheleni amalka shalach benah lemilchama ve'amra. It once happened with Queen Helene. Helene was the queen of the land of Adebeni. She and her family converted to Judaism and eventually moved to Yerushalayim, where she spent many years, as the Tiferet Yisrael explains in his commentary to Yoma, chapter 3, Mishnah 10. Since a non-Jew's vow of Nazirut is meaningless, as we will see B'ezrat Hashem b'li neder in chapter 9, Mishnah 1, this story must have happened after her conversion. So again, it once happened with Queen Helene that her son went to war, and she said, if my son returns from the war in peace, meaning safely, I will be a Nizirah for 7 years. Her son returned from the war safely, and so she kept her vow and was a Nizirah for 7 years while outside of Eretz Israel. Although Queen Helene was a righteous woman who always observed the rabbi's rulings, as it says in Sukkah, page 2b, she did not immediately travel to Eretz Israel to observe her Nizirut there, and a possible reason for this is that the rabbis were not aware of her vow, and so could not instruct her to come to Eretz Israel, or she was forced to remain outside of Eretz Israel during those 7 years in order to properly rule her kingdom. Ubsof Sheva Shanim Atal Haaretz. At the end of these 7 years, she went up to Eretz Israel to conclude her Nazirut with shaving and offerings. V'orua Bet Hillel sheteh Nizirah ot Sheva Shanim acherot. And Bet Hillel instructed her to be a Nizirah for another 7 years, as they ruled above. Ubsof Sheva Shanim Nitmet. At the end of this second term of 7 years, on the very last day, she became tamet through a corpse-related tumah that causes a Nazir to forfeit his term. She therefore forfeited the entire second term and had to observe yet a third term of Nazirut for 7 years. V'nimtzet Nizirah 21 shana. As a result, she ended up being a Nizirah for 21 years, 7 years outside of Eretz Israel and 14 years inside Eretz Israel. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, however, said, לא הייתה נזירה ל-14 שנה. She was a Nazirah for only 14 years. According to Rabbi Yehuda, since she became Tameh on the very last day of her term, she had to observe only 30 more days. Rabbi Yehuda follows the view of Rabbi Eliezer in Mishnah 4, who holds that a Nazir who becomes Tameh on the last day of his Nazirut forfeits only 30 days. Therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Queen Eleni was a Nazirah for 14 years and 30 days, which Rabbi Yehuda rounds off to 14 years. Rabbi Yehuda does not mention the 30 days explicitly because his main point is to dispute the first Tana and argue that it was not 21 years but 14 years. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda speaks only of whole years. And that is then a Mishnah Vav. Mishnah Zayin continues, if someone has two sets of witnesses testifying about him, the first set of witnesses testify that he accepted upon himself 2 terms of Nazirut, and the second set of witnesses testify that he accepted upon himself 5 terms of Nazirut, and he claims that he did not vow at all. Now the Mishnah discusses a case where the witnesses all testify about the same moment in time. If they testified about 2 different times, then the person would be obligated to observe 7 terms of Nazirut, 2 for the vow he made at one point in time according to the first set of witnesses, and 5 for the separate vow he made at another point in time according to the second set of witnesses. Rather, again, we're talking about where the argument is the witnesses are testifying about the same moment in time. Bet Shammai say, Nechleka edut, the testimony is divided, meaning both testimonies are tossed out, since the 2 sets of witnesses contradict each other, and the court has no way of knowing who is telling the truth. Then kan nizirut, therefore there is no nizirut obligation here. When 2 sets of witnesses contradict each other, neither of their testimony is accepted. The person who is being testified about remains with his own claim that he did not vow at all, and does not have to observe any term of nizirut. Bet Hillel say yesh bichal 5 time, included in 5 terms is 2 terms of Nazirut, meaning that since all the witnesses agree that he accepted at least 2 terms of Nazirut, the testimony about 2 terms is considered valid. She Nazir time, therefore the law is that he must be a Nazir for 2 terms. Although he denies ever vowing to be a Nazir, we have the testimony of witnesses that he did accept at least 2 terms, even if we do not know which set of witnesses is telling the truth. The court can therefore require him to observe 2 terms in the Nazirut. The testimony about the other 3 terms, however, is contradicted by the other witnesses, and therefore is disregarded, and he does not need to observe them. And that is an Abotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.